This week we're going to focus on two areas where sensitivity is really needed: having difficult discussions and community engagement. We'll start with difficult discussions. For those aspiring to healthcare management positions, these conversations will become ones that you experience more and more frequently, whether they be delivering performance assessments and reviews, disciplining staff, or perhaps delivering difficult news to patients or clients. The way that we handle these conversations may be different than our usual conversations, where we've been learning to have a more direct approach. For difficult decisions, we choose instead to have an indirect approach. I want to emphasize that this isn't a discussion about approaching difficult news or couching difficult news. This is the way in which messages are constructed, not whether the messages are constructed. We've talked a lot about the direct approach to message development, getting the what's in it for your reader out early so that they're engaged and understand why they need to continue listening, reading, or watching. Delivering difficult news is a bit different though, but for very similar reasons. Case in point, if you were to approach your staff with a message such as, "Hi Jane, your report needs to be written," or "Hi Jane, your idea was not accepted," the message that needs to be heard by your audience may be that their work or ideas have been rejected. But if that is your direct approach, then your audience may respond similar to the way that this woman is in the photo. We'll talk about some of the effects of mental noise and what causes people to shut down and stop paying attention when they're stressed during our issues management discussion later on. But for now, let's just keep this picture in mind as to why we sometimes need to take an indirect approach. So, how do you buffer your message? Start your message with a neutral but meaningful statement that's relevant and concise. Be careful not to convey a false impression that good news will follow. Start with the part of the message that represents the best news. Compliment them. Praise the receiver's accomplishments, organization, or efforts, but only do so with honesty and sincerity. Appreciation. You can convey thanks to the reader for doing business or for sending something, for a service or job well done, for showing confidence in your organization, for expressing their feelings, or simply providing feedback, even in a letter terminating an employee's contract. But just be careful you don't thank them for something you're about to refuse. Show agreement. Make a relevant statement to which both the reader and receiver can agree. And use facts. Provide objective information that introduces the bad news. Understand them. Show that you care about the reader. And if you're going to use an apology, do it early, do it briefly, and be sincere. So presenting the reasons. This section is probably the most important part of a bad news conversation because it explains why a negative decision is necessary. Without sound reasons, your message will fail no matter how cleverly it's organized or written. Providing an explanation reduces feelings of ill will and improves the chances that the reader will accept the bad news. Here's a few tips. Be cautious in explaining. If the reasons are not confidential or legally questionable, you can be specific. Cite the reader's benefits. Your audience will be more open to bad news if, in some way, there is any kind of benefit to them. Explain the company policy. Instead of a blanket statement about company policy being restrictive about something, gently say why the policy makes sense. Show your reader you care. Positive words can play a role in how your message is received. Avoid words like error, never, unfortunately, misunderstand, regret, impossible. Show that the matter was treated fairly and seriously. Don't pass the buck or blame others. Although you can't prevent the disappointment that bad news brings, you can reduce the pain somewhat by breaking the news sensitively. Be especially considerate when the reader will suffer personally from the bad news. A number of thoughtful techniques can lessen the impact. Position the bad news. Instead of spotlighting it, enclose the bad news between other sentences, perhaps among your reasons. Try not to let the refusal begin or end a paragraph. The reader's eye will linger on these high visibility spots. Use the passive voice. Passive voice verbs enable you to describe an action without connecting it to a specific person, whereas the active voice focuses attention on a person. We don't. The passive voice highlights the action. Free parking is not provided because. Accentuate the positive. Imply the refusal. It's sometimes possible to avoid a direct statement of refusal. Often your reasons and explanations leave no doubt that a request has been denied. Explicit refusals may be unnecessary and at times cruel. The danger of an implied refusal, of course, is that it can be so subtle that the reader dismisses it. Be certain that you make the bad news clear, thus preventing the need for further correspondence. Suggest a compromise or alternative. A refusal is not so if a suitable compromise, substitute, or alternative is available. After explaining the bad news sensitively, close the message with a pleasant statement that promotes goodwill. The closing should be personalized and may include a forward look, an alternative good wishes, or an off-the-subject remark. So let's have a discussion on constructive feedback. This is another important area where leaders need to ensure that they have well-developed communication skills. What does constructive feedback look like? Constructive feedback is objective. Be matter-of-fact. Don't be judgmental. Use concrete examples. Base your comments on specifics. Instead of, you missed a lot of deadlines, state, on Project X you were 3 days late, 5 days on Project Y, and 2 on Project Z. Encourage discussion. Is there something that's happening that perhaps I should better understand? Pave the way for a positive future. How can we work together to overcome these challenges? Focus on the problem, not the person. We're having trouble meeting deadlines in other parts of the process because there's a delay within our shop. Don't send mixed messages. Don't enable the employee to think that they've just had a positive review, when in fact you're putting a performance improvement plan in place. Make sure you have the conversation in person, face-to-face, and in a private area. And don't make it a lecture. Involve the person in the discussion.